prevention site. The operator of the Abbotsford Community Hub says the clinic offers supervised consumption services, mental health supports, and connections to community and housing. But its lease is expiring and they're left with no other option. People who rely on the clinic say the closure puts patients at risk.
This place closing is going to hurt a lot of people. There's going to be a lot of overdoses. It is about safety, not just addiction. It's like a place that the homeless can come and be safe and know that they're not going to die from using.
Fraser Health says clients will be transitioned to other services and it's looking to reinvest funding elsewhere in Abbotsford. Longtime Vancouver urban affairs journalist Frances Beulah is making the switch from reporting to campaigning. Beulah is seeking a city council nomination under the banner of One City. She says she wants to use her journalism experience to improve the city in a different way.
I actually thought I would go to my grave, writing one last story. But really, at this point, I've got 1,000 students out there, many of them working in journalism, and they're carrying the flag forward. I've done my job, and I wanted to do something different, get off the sidelines and actually try to have some direct impact.
Beulah won a Jack Webster Lifetime Achievement Award for her BC journalism career. The BC municipal election will be held this year on October 26. And a drag queen in Kelowna is cordially inviting everyone to their wedding this summer. Tyson Cook, known on stage as Frida Wales, has turned their wedding into a theatrical event. Anyone can buy a ticket to watch.
A lot of the people in my community and around in my shows have some pretty non-existent relationships with their families, so they just kind of build a community around them like I have, and we all just kind of celebrate together and love and help each other all out.
Wales, or Queen Mother, will be legally marrying their fiancé in Kelowna on August 22nd. That's it for me for now. You're watching CBC News BC. I'm Leanne Young. Thanks for tuning in.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The war in the Middle East continues, and the Iranian regime has chosen a new leader, the son of the supreme leader who was killed by one of the initial U.S. and Israeli strikes. What will this choice mean for Iran and its citizens? And as Canada's House of Commons prepares to debate the conflict tonight, what do you think of Canada's response? Plus, we continue Menopause Mondays with an ob-gyn as our guest and asking, what are your questions about navigating perimenopause? That's after 12:30. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. In a few moments, we'll also speak with an economist about the impact of the war on markets and on oil prices, and in turn, the price that you're seeing at the pump. You can call us now on our open line, though. What does this election of Mojtaba Khamenei as the new leader mean for Iran? And what do you think of Canada's response to the war in the Middle East? Our number is 604-669-3733. That's 604-669-3733 or 1-800-825-5950. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca, and we are live on TikTok, and you can leave a comment there. The conflict in Iran is continuing. Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, has been named Iran's new Supreme Leader. Mojtaba Khamenei was involved in his father's administration. U.S. President Donald Trump is not happy with the choice. And as the conflict expands this afternoon in Ottawa, MPs will hold a debate on the conflict in the House of Commons. That's taking place after 3 p.m. Pacific. Now, it is known as a take-note debate on the hostilities in Iran and the Middle East and on the impact for Canadians abroad. Prime Minister Mark Carney is not expected to attend. Earlier today, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre accused Carney of hiding and said that the Prime Minister should attend the debate and explain his position. Poilievre says his party supports the U.S. and Israeli action, which could overturn the Iranian regime. NDP interim leader Don Davies referred to Carney's position on the conflict as, quote, unprincipled, incoherent, and contradictory. He said the NDP wants Canada to rule out any participation and condemn the war as an international war violation. Again, we're asking you, what does this election of Khamenei's son as a new supreme leader mean for Iran and its citizens? What do you think of Canada's response to the conflict? Our numbers again, 604-669-3733 or 1-800-825-5950. Again, 604-669-3733 or 1-800-825-5950. And as we have been reporting, the Middle East conflict is affecting oil prices and in turn the price at gas stations that Canadians are seeing. Earlier today, I spoke with UBC Sauder professor Werner Antweiler. Can you give us the basic, simple explanation as to why this conflict in the Middle East is driving up oil prices and prices at the pump here?
Very simply put, oil markets are globally integrated. What happens somewhere in the world affects prices everywhere. And right now, due to the hostilities in the Middle East, we see the Strait of Hormuz actually being blocked. Traffic isn't going through the Strait of Hormuz, and that is about 20% of the global oil supply. So this is a very, very significant amount of oil that is missing and that the market cannot replace overnight.
How much of that supply are we relying on here in Canada?
Yeah, indirectly, we're relying on all the oil in the world because as soon as there is a bottleneck somewhere, there is demand for oil from everywhere. And that means supplies from North America are basically filling the gap that has now actually shown up in Asia. Most of the oil that's going through the Strait of Hormuz is shipped to Asian countries, China and India in particular. But as they're falling short, they are now importing oil from everywhere else they can.
As this conflict has spread, energy infrastructure has been hit as well. What impact might that have?
Yeah, so the long-term impact remains to be seen because right now it's just the shipping that is affected. But if production facilities are affected as well, that could have a long-lasting impact because repairing and maintaining these facilities, if they had been targeted in attacks, that could take weeks, could take months, and that could actually disrupt oil supply for much longer than markets anticipate even now.
Besides what Canadians are seeing as they go to gas stations, what are the other parts of the economy that could be impacted by rising oil prices?
The entire supply chain relies on energy, and gasoline and diesel fuel is, of course, used in transportation. Everything from airlines to ground transportation to the trucking business. So these are higher costs that, if that persist, will be passed on to consumers and through the supply chain. So there will be an inflationary effect that will pervade through almost the entire economy.
Is there anything that the Canadian government can do about that right now?
Not really. These are global oil markets, and we're sort of standing aside here. The markets are integrated, and that's not going to change. That means the only thing we can do is adjust our consumption of gasoline and diesel fuels. And that is something where the higher prices will provide the signal to the market to do that.
And Werner, does this rise in prices then, and how long it lasts, does that rely solely on how long the conflict itself goes?
Essentially, yes. And that will, of course, potentially even last longer if there is damage to infrastructure. So any infrastructure damage could well exceed the duration of the conflict. And so there is significant worry that as this conflict drags on, that the Gulf states that are protecting their infrastructure right now will be running out of munitions to do so. And if that happens, their facilities and production facilities could be very vulnerable.
Werner, thank you so much for this.
My pleasure.
Werner Antweiler is an associate professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business and chair in international trade policy. And as we mentioned, tonight, MPs in the House of Commons will debate the hostilities in Iran and the Middle East and the impact on Canadians abroad. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre spoke about that and Canada's response this morning.
The Prime Minister has taken 4 different positions on the war in the Middle East in 4 days. He was for the attack. Then he said he regretted his support for the attack. Then he said his support for the attack was illegal. Then he said he was open to contributing Canadian troops to the war. And then he said his party has said one thing to one group and another thing to other groups. All they are doing is trying to pander in all directions while dividing our country and confusing our allies.
That's Pierre Poilievre speaking this morning. Also speaking this morning was interim NDP leader Don Davies.
First and foremost, from the beginning of this attack on Iran by Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Canadian position has been unprincipled, it's been contradictory, and it's been incoherent. And New Democrats tonight will be expressing our position, calling on this government to clearly condemn what is an illegal attack on Iran and to name it for what it is, which is an illegal attack that is in violation of the UN Charter. Second, we're calling on this government to make a clear statement that Canadian troops and resources will not be used in the prosecution of this illegal war. And finally, we're calling on this government to call for an immediate ceasefire and the commencement of diplomatic talks to come to a peaceful resolution of this matter.
Again, we're taking your calls. What does the selection of Khamenei's son as the new supreme leader mean for Iran and its citizens? And what do you think of Canada's response to the conflict in the Middle East? Our number, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. My guest is Parsa Alirezai, a research assistant at the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies at Simon Fraser University. Parsa, thank you very much for joining us. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Michelle.
We will talk about the response from the Canadian government and the Prime Minister in a moment. I'd like to ask you, what you think of the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei as Supreme Leader, and what does that signal about the direction of Iran's political system right now?
I think they're trying to signal continuity and wartime endurance. A couple of things are very important. The institutions of the Islamic Republic are obviously deeply embedded, and they were designed for a sort of protracted engagement of this sort. And I think we really need to look at the way they've been trying to signal internal stability and continuity, but at the same time, external resilience, right? They want to show that, like, hey, no matter what we do, we are sort of going to continue on the war path. We are going to resist you in a sort of diffused geography, almost like a Vietnam War of sorts. You know, they want to make this a sort of quagmire for the United States by saying, like, no matter what you do, there's going to be a sort of very there's going to be a Khamenei in charge, an IRGC friendly figure in charge, and I think this complicates things for the United States to some extent because they're looking to have a very short and limited war in many ways. They want the kinetic strikes to have a political impact to some extent, but mostly they want to highlight their operational successes, right? That's something that's deeply important for them. And for them, I mean, I think you spoke with an economist right before I jumped on. It's really important for the United States, and as we've seen, they're trying to signal certain policies that calms the energy markets, the global energy markets. For them, it's really important that this engagement that they're having, this war that they've started, is not seen as a sort of protracted war. You know, this is something that can hurt them in the long term, especially with the upcoming midterm elections. So these are the sort of calculations between the Americans and the Iranians, and this is what the Iranians are trying to signal too. Their goal is, hey, we don't think that the Americans, have what it takes to endure a long-term war that can be really costly in terms of the global economic catastrophe that they can induce.
But with each side seemingly, digging in their heels, are you concerned about a protracted conflict?
Yes, I think this will end extremely poorly for pretty much all ordinary people around the world. The world is very much heavily dependent on the Gulf for various things, everything from fertilizer to various energy inputs, from jet fuel to diesel to crude oil to natural gas, liquefied natural gas. We've seen the Iranian sort of military establishment target energy infrastructure in the Gulf, which means that no matter how long this war takes, whether it ends by the end of the week or it ends in a couple of weeks, we're going to see a disruption in the sort of energy supply in the world market for a long time. And this will also impact the sort of logistical chains that the world depends on in terms of the movement of goods and people. Not in terms of the energy inputs, but because, flights in and around the Gulf will be continually disrupted for a long time. And insurance premiums will have already gone through the roof. So this is going to be a problem. For Iranians, for ordinary Iranians, this is already catastrophic. I'm not sure if anybody saw the sort of apocalyptic scenes from Tehran, where acid rain was falling on people after the Israelis struck, fuel depots in and around Tehran. It was something apocalyptic. I mean, I've anecdotal commentary coming from family and friends inside Tehran talking about how, with the bombs, they've shattered windows, and at the same time, the air is so toxic that they have to find ways to either get out of the city or lock up and stay, indoors. So for ordinary Iranians, this is catastrophic. For people around the world, this will also be catastrophic due to increasing basic goods cost.
And for people in Iran, it's very hard to really get details from within the country. But could this be at some point something that would be a catalyst for, more demonstrations, or does this mean again, just a continuation of support for the regime?
I think we need to think about it a little differently. This might resemble Iraq 1991 more than anything in some ways. While there are obviously some key and remarkable differences between the countries and the wars that were conducted in scale, I think we're looking at a regime or a government, right? I mean, regime is oftentimes used, but this is a government, this is a state that has been under economic siege for a long time. The economic situations for many Iranians was unsustainable, and economic uncertainty and precarity often induces social mobilization and, protests and, strikes, so on and so forth. People wanting to see some sort of political change as a result of economic precarity. And, this might continue after the war, but during the war, it's really hard for people to mobilize, right? And this is why like we really need to emphasize that this, like when it comes to wartime objectives of the United States and the state of Israel, it's not to see necessarily a sort of fruitful political mobilizations from the Iranian masses. It's mostly to just induce, state capacity reduction vis-a-vis the Iranian state. It's really hard. I mean, frankly, just thinking about it in sort of common sense terms, it's really hard for people to go outside and protest when the air is toxic and they might get bombed. Quite simply. And what you've had is also sort of hyper securitized system become even more securitized as a part of a wartime situation, right? I mean, people going out to protest might be met with even more violence by state forces. So it is sort of illogical to assume that during wartime people will take to the streets and protest the government. People are trying to figure out, what their next step is going to be in terms of survival. And this is also another factor. A lot of the youth have also evacuated from the major cities, right? If we're thinking about the major cities as targets of U.S. and Israeli bombs, and you have young people who are capable of leaving those cities, it's unlikely that those same young people will come back to the cities to demonstrate when, a lot of these arteries that facilitate movement in and out of cities and within cities, that the government would simply allow this to happen. So I would deem it unlikely that in the coming weeks we will see regime change. That's my take on it, at least.
My guest is Parsa Alirezai, a research assistant at the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies at Simon Fraser University, and ahead as well of a debate among MPs on the conflict in the Middle East and the impact on Canadians abroad. That is how the debate is being termed. Ahead of that, we're asking you what you think of Canada's response to the conflict. 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Our first caller is Roman in Port Alberni. Roman, welcome back to the show. Thanks for calling us.
Thank you for taking my call. How are you all today?
Just fine. How about yourself? What are your thoughts on this issue?
I am going to start by saying this is not occurring in a vacuum. We have to be first mindful of that. And under that statement, I want to preface this by saying we also need to be mindful of the sovereignty of every nation that is a nation on this planet, then follow suit with the next steps being directed by our unified commitment to NATO and our unifying commitment to anything that stems from the UN and all of its accords, all of its treaties, and all of its agreed statements of how we are going to conduct ourselves. That being said, this war is full of unknowns. It is by no means set in stone what is going to be happening, so it's all uncertainty. It is literally hell in a bottle. It's lightning in a bottle right now. We don't know what's going to come from it. So why are we not choosing to rely on the things that are set in place precisely for stuff like this, even if it isn't fully fleshed out, to the point of understanding there are touchstones we can use as a starting point for our involvement? And that will be, again, abiding by and adhering to UN and NATO-related treaties, practices, and callings to ourselves as a nation. Then I want to also add, in our country with Canada, our leader is privy to information that and others within the leadership making decisions on our involvement may be disclosing what can be disclosed, but may know stuff that we don't. And I mean we, including the leader of the opposition, because we don't have security clearance to all of the information that is at play. And I would like us to be careful and mindful about what decisions are being made, how they're being arrived at, and that is an ever-evolving situation we're a part of.
When it comes to the debate and the rhetoric around it. Thank you very much for the call, Roman. That's Roman in Port Alberni. What do you make, Parsa, of the response from the Canadian government?
I think the Canadian government, this is something I mentioned before, they're trying to walk a fine line, deal with the sort of geopolitical reality that is Canada being a much weaker state bordered by an unencumbered, belligerent state that is looking to revise the post-World War II international rules-based order that it constructed on the basis of its own power to benefit, itself, create a sort of decades-long framework for how international conduct is to move forward. With the caller, I do agree. This is quite concerning in terms of, the non-use of force, right? When we talk about the UN Charter, probably the most important thing that came out of the Second World War was the norm around the non-use of force. When we have disputes between states, they're supposed to find many ways to find sort of ways to resolve those disputes without using force. And what we've seen, especially with the Trump administration, but also before him, we shouldn't forget that the Bush administration also proceeded in many ways contrary to the rules that the UN Charter was trying to entrench and embody. So this isn't something necessarily new when it comes to the behavior of the United States at the international level. But what is new is that they're not remotely trying to justify their actions under international law and the principles around principles governing the use of force at the international legal level. So this is quite concerning, especially when it comes to Canada and the sort of and the traditional allies of the United States. When the United States has, especially with this administration, they've openly threatened the territorial integrity and sovereignty of a lot of these states, whether it's Denmark or Canada. So this is very, very important. So this is where Mark Carney's trying to walk a line. They're trying to muddy their response. So, the Americans can't read too much into it as we're, strictly against the actions of the United States, like, the posture of the Spanish government, and that we're not completely in support of it in terms of the interests of, the political classes inside Canada who are deeply anxious about, American aggression, vis-a-vis Canada's interests as well. So it's trying to walk that fine line. But regardless, this is a catastrophe in terms of the sort of norm around the non-use of force in international relations.
My next caller is Mehdi, joining us from Victoria. Hi, Mehdi. What do you think this means for people in Iran, and what do you think of Canada's response?
I have been out of country for 47 years, and for 47 years I oppose both Shah regime and the government we have right now. But
out of Iran, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But now that the foreign country, United States and Israel, decide against international law to attack Iran and destroy the infrastructure, attacking the hospitals. More than 9 hospitals were attacked in Tehran. 2 universities were attacked. What do you think I should do? I support the government. We have the right to defend our country. We are a country of 4,000 years history. We are not a country of 200 years or 250 years history.
And Mehdi, when Iran is launching missile and drone attacks around the Middle East in retaliation, are you worried about the escalation?
No, because those countries allow United States to put military bases, and from those military bases they are attacking Iran. Iran is not attacking their infrastructure. They are attacking those military bases. This covered Arab country has been sitting and watching for 2.5 years the genocide in Gaza and doing nothing. And now they are trying to help United States and Israel to destroy Iran. Iran has the right to defend itself, and no country. Why should Iran never attack anybody? In the last 300 years, Iran never attacked any country.
What we've heard from people like, for example, the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, that this is an autocratic regime, a theocracy. Are you worried about what this means, though, for the future for people in Iran?
If it is that's Iranian people business, it has nothing to do with the puppet like Poilievre that opening his mouth because he's sucking to the Israel and United States. That's all he does. He's a puppet. It has nothing to do with any foreign people. It's the business of Iranian people. If they decide to get rid of this government, they will do it.
Mehdi,
stay from intervention in Iran is none of your business.
Mehdi,
none of the business of Canada.
Thank you so much for the call. And so, Parsa, obviously, this is an emotional issue for Mehdi. we saw the demonstrations, the rallies, people celebrating, Iranian Canadians celebrating, after the death of Khamenei. How are Iranian Canadians feeling right now?
A couple of things. I think to address Mehdi's comments, I think he is right in many ways. I think a lot of people would like to, say people are emotional. Absolutely. I mean, even if we talk about the response of many Iranians to the killing of Ali Khamenei, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and his family and a lot of the Iranian leadership, I think they were like a lot of people who had faced state repression from the Islamic Republic or even from the sort of government, the repressive government before the Islamic Republic, the monarchy. I think it's understandable for people to have a sort of experience around joy, like that they would be joyful that somebody who had oppressed them is, dead. But I also think that Mehdi's concerns that he highlighted, they're real. There is nothing to indicate that the use of air power and the destruction of civilian infrastructure using air power actually leads to democratic, quote unquote, regime change. There's absolutely no scientific evidence behind that. There are scholars who have studied this stuff for generations now, since the sort of invention of air power as a sort of means of military, like means of warfare. And at no time or point they have indicated that this can sort of induce positive political transformation inside the sort of target country. And the questions around the Gaza genocide, I mean, that's quite clear. That, for example, a lot of norms were also violated in that sense. The law of armed conflict was so openly and consistently violated that it has also set a precedent that a lot of countries can bomb their sort of enemy country, their adversarial opponent. They can target hospitals, universities, and simply label them collateral damage, or that these institutions, the civilian institutions, were human shields. And the same talking points I would like to remind people are also being used in terms of Iran and Iran's infrastructure, whether they were constructed by the Islamic Republic or their infrastructure dating back to the Shah's time before 1979. They're all being targeted because you can't separate state and society that way. Infrastructure is not solely military. Security infrastructure is not clearly military, and they're not always so distant from urban areas or civilian infrastructure. So it was bound to happen. You had a couple of years where the norms around the law of armed conflict were being consistently violated, international humanitarian law. And you have now the violation of the sort of main principles of international law without any sort of blowback. And this is the landscape that we're dealing with. And for a lot of Iranians, this is a non-issue. Like a lot of Iranians, especially in diaspora, they could care less, frankly. I mean, they're not. And there are some Iranians inside Iran as well, too, who kind of don't see that. Like they have faced so much oppression from within and outside Iran for so long that for them, this is a deeply emotional response. Some people would even consider it an irrational response. But I don't think it's in our place to kind of gauge, like, okay, like what are Iranians' responses to this, and like their immediate response to, like an adversary being, hit and hurt, like how that should reflect on the sort of broader perspective, which is that this is going to be catastrophic. We've seen years of eroding norms around the use of force. And so do I expect, for example, that Iranians will continue to be sort of jolly? Like a lot of the Iranians who are supporting this war are going to be happy about this? Given the track record of the belligerents around this conflict, around this war on Iran, I would be worried, genuinely, that there will be like such a sort of catastrophic and prolonged campaign that even if this short-term campaign were to cease, that Iranian infrastructure, like civilian infrastructure, will continue to be targeted for the foreseeable future. Once things are ruptured like this, it's really hard to roll them back.
Okay.
We haven't seen that stop in Gaza. We haven't seen it stop in Lebanon, by the way. It's been continuing in Lebanon as well. This is something that hasn't gotten enough attention, and we're going to see it in Iran. And we've seen it. Hospitals have been bombed, highways, infrastructure, oil refineries, depots, they will be bombed.
Parsa, I will have to leave it there for time. Really appreciate your joining us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Parsa Alirezai is a research assistant at the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies at SFU. It is now 12:36. You're with BC Today. And coming up, we will continue Menopause Mondays as we take them through March and discuss the issues that you're facing as you navigate perimenopause. What are your questions? We'll take them coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The man accused of killing an RCMP officer in a Burnaby Park more than 3 years ago is testifying to determine whether he is fit to stand trial. Jongwon Ham is appearing in BC Supreme Court today. He's charged with first-degree murder in the stabbing death of Constable Shaylin Yang. Two Vancouver area Catholic schools have agreed to pay $30 million to settle a class action lawsuit brought by former students. The students say they experienced abuse by a current or former member of the Christian Brothers at Vancouver College in St. Thomas More. The settlement was reached without a trial. It still needs to be approved by the BC Supreme Court. And the Vancouver Park Board will vote today on a recommendation to reconnect Lost Lagoon to the ocean. The lagoon was cut off more than 100 years ago when the Stanley Park Causeway was built. The Park Board says sediment has been building up, leading to poor water quality. And now the forecast. Snowfall warnings are in place for sections of Vancouver Island, including Greater Victoria, and heavy snow is also expected on sections of the Malahat and the Coquihalla. On the north coast, a chance of flurries or showers this afternoon with a high of 3, highs to -5 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, a high of 0 with some sunshine and a chance of flurries. Highs up to 5 with a chance of wet flurries in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a chance of flurries or showers with a high of 6. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, showers or wet flurries this afternoon with highs around 7. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for joining us. And it is a Monday, and we continue our series Menopause Mondays, week 2 now, as we continue throughout the month of March. Now, last week we spoke about the menopause hormone therapies, many of them now fully covered under the National Pharmacare program in BC. But perimenopause remains a hidden mystery for many women and gender-diverse people, and it's something that we are rarely taught about until the symptoms begin. Here's a clip from the CBC TV series Small Achievable Goals.
You have your period again?
I haven't stopped. I'm like a shell of a woman. Not only that, Julia, it's like I'm anxious, I'm bloated. Also, I'm losing my hair. I can't sleep. Oh my God.
You know what?
What?
Some of these symptoms sound a little familiar to me, like from the before time. Like before I had the big one?
No, thank you. I am only 44, honey.
Okay, but I've done a lot of research,
No.
and I think you might possibly be in perimenopause.
No.
That was a clip from the CBC series Small Achievable Goals. And it is all about navigating through life in perimenopause. We're asking you, what questions do you have about navigating perimenopause? You can give us a call, 604-669-3733. That's 604-669-3733 or 1-800-825-5950. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. And we should be clear that we're going to talk generally here and not giving out specific individual medical advice. And today I'm joined by Dr. Tracy Rodgers. She's an obstetrician gynecologist based on Vancouver Island and a menopause specialist. Dr. Rodgers, thank you so much for being with us. Good afternoon.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is amazing that you're doing this for women. It's so important.
There is clearly a need for this conversation. You are a frequent speaker on this issue. I'm also told you go by Dr. Tracy, so I will address you as such. Dr. Tracy, what did you take from that short clip that we ran there?
That's the lived experience of women. And it's so hilarious because she's having what are very classical symptoms. And when her friend says it could be perimenopause, her first instinct is, no, I'm too young. It catches us all by surprise because the system is not set up to give us a heads up or a warning. And many women suffer for years before they understand what they're actually going through.
Wow. You know, myself being in this demographic, you know, what impact does that have to not actually know what the symptoms are, not to know what to expect?
Well, I can speak personally to that because I'm an OB-GYN, so you would assume that I was very well educated about menopause, and that's actually not the case. Because when I went through perimenopause, I didn't know that my debilitating joint pain in the morning had anything to do with it. I did not make the connection between my mental health symptoms of anxiety, irritability, and sometimes scary rage had anything to do with it because that's not the way we were taught about menopause. The focus was on hot flashes. And I didn't have hot flashes, and many women don't get hot flashes until later in the transition. And some women never get hot flashes. So it ends up being a symptom management approach, something for your joint pain, something for your anxiety, something for your sleep. And I remember when I finally got estrogen, I was shocked at some of the symptoms that got better that I hadn't even connected those dots. So I kind of describe it as women are getting caught with their pants down going through perimenopause because we don't know what to expect. And I hear that feedback from women all the time, like, why don't we know this? Why is this a secret?
Before I go to our calls, what can people expect? Let's just start there.
Well, I sometimes approach this in a little bit of an unconventional way because one of the issues that's been highlighted is there's not sufficient research done on menopause to start and women's health in general.
Right.
So we have to recognize that if we had to wait for the research to catch up, that's not going to serve any of us. So sometimes coloring outside the lines is important. And what I learned is, just for context, I graduated the year the Women's Health Initiative was published. When the breast cancer scare happened and women stopped their hormones, we stopped learning about menopause. So my first year in practice was a lot of anxious, sweaty women who were terrified to take hormones. So it put menopause right in my line of sight. And I sort of became very curious about how we manage menopause and what the conversation is around it. And so I feel like I've done 20 years of informal grounded theory research, listening to women's stories and trying to figure out how to connect those dots. Our current system doesn't allow that. Like, for example, even if you have a supportive GP, if you have a 6-minute appointment and you're only allowed to bring one symptom to the front, how do those dots ever get connected? So my running joke is, if you're going through perimenopause and your doctor will only talk about one symptom, call their secretary and book 25 appointments and tell them you're going through perimenopause.
And that's why.
Because it does require a whole body approach. It involves every system of our body, our mental health, our physical health. It affects the people around us. It affects us in the workplace. So menopause is not just a women's issue. It's an everybody issue.
Certainly why we're taking such a holistic look at this as well, looking at fitness and nutrition next week and exercise, as well as the workplace.
Excellent.
So really good to have you with us here today. My guest is Dr. Tracy Rodgers, OB-GYN based on Vancouver Island. As we ask you, you can give us a call. What are your questions about navigating perimenopause? 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Marie is calling us from Vernon. Hi, Marie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Premenopausal, menopause, all of it is a big, big deal. I'm suffering with mental health big time. And the one thing that I get confused about is the brain fog. I don't know if it's brain fog, like what is included in brain fog, because I get, like, when I feel the attack, like that's what I feel like. It's an attack coming on. I get a cold flush all over my body. I feel confused. My brain isn't working. It doesn't want to communicate any information to describe what I'm feeling. I don't want to be around anyone. I don't want to be in public when this happens because it's such a scary feeling. And I've been prescribed lorazepam for it to put under my tongue to ease the attack. Is this something that is menopause, premenopause related?
It most certainly is. It's one of the most common symptoms I hear. But, you know, one of the reasons I think that the guidelines focus a lot on hot flashes is because they're objective and we can measure them. A lot of the symptoms of menopause are invisible and there's no real test for them. So it sort of requires you to believe women's lived experience. And we all know that's been a bit of a challenge for women. But brain fog is one of those symptoms that's multifactorial. So there is a direct connection to your hormone health. As loss of estrogen has direct impacts on your brain. That research has been demonstrated with Dr. Lisa Mascani. We lose blood flow to our brain when we lose estrogen, and brain fog is one of the symptoms. It's also exacerbated by high cortisol, sleep deprivation. So there's multiple potential things that can contribute to brain fog. One of the things in perimenopause, if you say it sort of comes on like a wave, one of the first things I would suggest is that you start tracking it in relation to your cycle. Because if it's only showing up in certain aspects of your cycle, for example, in the week leading up to your period, that's when your own estrogen production is at its lowest. So if you link it to your menstrual cycle, that's more evidence that there's a hormonal component. Because lorazepam in and of itself is not a treatment for brain fog. It may be lowering your anxiety about it. It may help you get a bit better sleep, but it's not specifically targeting that symptom. Whereas a lot of women who go on estrogen notice an improvement in their brain fog. Women who take micronized progesterone often get a fuller, deeper sleep, which improves their brain fog. So there's nobody who can, like, I wouldn't say to you, hormone replacement therapy will clear your brain fog, but if it's hormonally related to your menstrual cycle and you try HRT and it relieves your brain fog, then that answers the question. Sometimes we can only answer those questions with a trial of hormones and see what happens.
Thank you so much for that question. Again, if you have questions about navigating perimenopause, you can give us a call, 604-669-3733 or 1-800-825-5950. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And we do have a question from Lorna, who's asking about just coping with hot flushes and asking about the best fabric for calming the hot and the hot and the sweats and for getting better sleep.
I appreciate the question so much. None of my training focused on fabric. So I'm sure there's a lot of different products out there. But one of my reactions to that, I mean, yes, we can dress in layers, we can open our bedroom window, we can pick cooling sheets. Or if you don't have contraindications, the best treatment for vasomotor symptoms is estrogen replacement. I was having 30 to 35 hot flashes a night while trying to do call and work, and no fabric was going to make that better. But when I went on estrogen and more importantly got on the appropriate dose, my hot flashes were gone. So those things can help, but they're targeted more at trying to give you a little bit of relief from the symptom. But the treatment for vasomotor symptoms for women who can take hormones is estrogen replacement.
And when would you suggest that a woman not take HRT?
Well, there are some contraindications. Like currently, personal history of breast cancer is considered a contraindication. Undiagnosed vaginal bleeding, estrogen-dependent cancers, certain types of liver disease. But the reality is the absolute contraindications to HRT are few and far between. And we've known for a very long time that for the majority of healthy women, the benefits of hormones far outweigh the risks. So a lot of our treatments, like SSRIs or antidepressants target the symptoms, but don't necessarily target the cause. So if the cause is hormonal, the first line therapy for women who are candidates should be hormone replacement.
Michelle also asked if you could please comment on testosterone therapy and where that would fall into a hormone therapy treatment.
Well, this one is even more controversial, and testosterone is a challenging hormone for women to access. I've been prescribing testosterone replacement for quite a long time in my practice because I do recognize it's a very important hormone for women. The only approved indication for testosterone in the current guidelines is low libido, which most of us will meet that criteria going through menopause, quite frankly. But there's a lot of other off-label benefits that women report from testosterone replacement. One of them is improved cognition, energy. I find women who are physically active, who exercise, seem to get the most benefit from testosterone. However, there are no FDA-approved testosterone products for women in Canada. So we're stuck with either using male doses, having to dose them at a fraction of a male dose, which can be very inaccurate and frustrating, or we use custom compounding, which is generally how I prescribe testosterone. But it is challenging to access. Like if your family doctor is already uncomfortable with prescribing estrogen and progesterone, testosterone is going to be a bit of a leap. I would like to see a little bit more awareness and research around testosterone replacement for women because it's a very important hormone.
More of that research, that call for data. Yeah, let's take another call here. Our number again, 604-669-3733. What are your questions about navigating perimenopause? Or 1-800-825-5950. Again, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. My guest is OB-GYN Dr. Tracy Rodgers, based on Vancouver Island. Also the founder of, we're going to hear about this a little bit later, Menopalooza, which is a movement dedicated to transforming the cultural conversation around menopause and midlife. Let's take up another call from Patty in Lillooet now. Hi, Patty. Yes, what did you want to mention or ask?
Oh, hi there. So I'm just about 40, and I feel like I have very beginnings, like just the suggestions of symptoms of perimenopause. And so, as they get a little bit worse, I have been interested in HRT. But in my case, it's very likely that I have endometriosis. And I was wondering if there is like a contraindication, or what do we even know about how those two things can react with each other?
That's such a good question. And it's common because a lot of women are affected by endometriosis. I have found it to be quite variable. There's a lot of women whose endometriosis has sort of gone quiet by the time they hit menopause. Some women will get an increase in their pain with hormone replacement. And it's important, in my opinion, it's important for women with endometriosis to also take progestin because it protects your uterus from estrogen, and endometriosis is endometrium. So progesterone can help suppress the endometriosis in relation to the estrogen. It's variable, and sometimes you won't know the impact it may or may not have on your endometriosis until you're actually trialing hormones. But it is not an absolute contraindication to hormones. Lots of women with a history of endometriosis can happily take hormone replacement.
Patty, thank you. And yes, I mean, I applaud that. Like looking for answers already as she prepares for perimenopause. Thank you so much for the call. Pam is up next in Peachland. Hi, Pam.
Hi.
Yeah,
Hello.
Go ahead. Yeah, what's your question?
Okay. I went through menopause and I had a really horrible experience with it. And I'm still actually going through it. And at the time, I went to my doctor and talked about hormone replacement therapy because it was really, really bad. And he told me that I could only go on it for 3 years, and then I would have to go off it, and then I would get the symptoms all flooding back again. So I thought, well, why go through it in 3 years and just try and go through it now? Is that not correct?
Sadly, that is not correct.
You're
There is no rule around the duration of hormone replacement therapy. Around the time the Women's Health Initiative came out, people were talking about a 5-year rule. because it was not until 5 years of use that this very slight increased risk of breast cancer showed up in women taking Provera. So that kind of turned into a 5-year rule, which there is no rule. We're seeing an increased comfort in women choosing to stay on hormone replacement for longer and longer periods of time. HRT is indicated for symptomatic menopause. Most women are not through their symptoms in 3 years. I've met 78-year-olds who are still having hot flushes every single night. So in my mind, you can stay on hormones as long as you are comfortable staying on hormones, provided that no other medical issue comes up that precludes that. And that's an ongoing conversation to have.
Okay.
But, you know, this just brings up this whole idea of gatekeeping around hormone replacement in medicine. In what other area of medicine do we use the words allowed? Like, you're not allowed to take it for any longer than 3 years. There's no magical risk that suddenly shows up at 3 years. If at 3 years you're still having ongoing symptoms, you stay on your hormone replacement therapy. And it depends on your age, your medical history, how long you've had symptoms, how long it's been since menopause. Like, there's a lot of variables to consider, but there is no such thing as a 3-year rule. And some women come off their hormones later in life and have no issues. Other women stay on them long term. But I think you got some misinformation.
I'm going to jump in here. I have a minute left, and I'd like to ask you about Menopalooza. My thanks to
Yes.
Angela and John, and I apologize for not getting to you, and John looking for ways to help his wife. Tell me about Menopalooza in about 30 seconds, if you would, Dr. Tracy.
So Menopalooza was actually founded by Bryn Meadows. I'm her co-founder. You can find her on her website, brynmeadows.ca. And the Menopalooza website is menopalooza.com. It's a menopause conference, and I use the term conference lightly. It takes a village to manage menopause. So the vibe of Menopalooza is no shame, authenticity. We see you, you're not doing it wrong. We have me, naturopathic medicine, pelvic floor physio, sexpert, fitness, nutrition, grief counselor, advocacy expert, panel discussions. So all of your questions tend to get answered in one weekend. And we did